Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025, and today we're going to talk about fire ants, the cost of starting and or running a farm podcast, and why gardening and farming has been so neglected in art, and why that's kind of a problem. So let's do it. All right. Well, welcome to Tuesday, everyone. Although for many of you, Tuesday is most of the way over at this point, but you get the idea. We are still extremely saturated here and now also pretty cold. Redbud winter is right on time as usual. It's physically difficult to walk around the farm right now as I sink into the clay at various spots or slip on it in others. Hoping our friends and fellow farmers affected by the flooding here are recovering well. I saw that the restaurant I mentioned yesterday that we sell a lot of our produce to, the water came right up to the door, like right at the door, but then started to recede. So we're very thankful for that. I'm sure there's still a lot of cleanup going on in Frankfurt, and we are thinking of you all. Oh, and changing gears for a second, I like to remind you all from time to time that for those of you who need a resource or a place to communicate with other growers, that isn't just the comment section of our YouTube channel, which is fine, but if you want a little bit more, the forum at no-tillgrowers.com remains a happening place with a lot of very good growers over there chatting and answering questions. That forum costs us like $100 a month or something, so it makes us really happy when you use it. We just always want to make sure there is an alternative to places like Facebook to chat about growing methods and just so you have a place you can ask questions and engage with other growers to see what they're talking about. That's a good spot for it. Link for that is in the show notes, or you can just find it at no-tillgrowers.com. Anyway, so I got this interesting question a few weeks ago from one of our Patreon members about how much it costs to run one of our podcasts. Like if we wanted to bring one of those podcasts that we had to sort of discontinue, if we wanted to bring one of those back, what would it cost? That's a great and actually kind of interesting question. So let me break down some of the costs of starting a podcast from scratch and what it costs us to run a podcast for anyone wondering if they themselves should start one. First, if you wanted to start a farming or gardening podcast right now, you could do it for pretty cheap. You could record it on whatever you are listening to this podcast on or watching it. You can even edit it there and then upload it to a podcast host, which will share it to all the various podcast networks. The podcast host would cost you something like, it can be anywhere from like $7 to $20 a month, depending on how much you upload. But if you don't have a site, like a website or anything in that vein, and you don't care what it sounds like particularly, there wouldn't really be any other major expenses. Or you could solely upload it to YouTube and it wouldn't cost you anything at all. So yeah, draw your own logo, do your own theme music, record your own stuff, and you could do it for pretty much next to nothing. Of course, if you want to turn that into a business, or in our case, a sort of nonprofit media company, or just make a really good product sound-wise, the expenses do go up. So to kind of give you a glimpse of like what things look like on our side, for us, between paying our hosts, paying the editor, and paying the producer, as well as paying the person who is working to get sponsors, it ends up being about $1,000 in labor per show, give or take, but that's not far off. But also, if there is not already a logo or theme music, you have to pay at least one time for that stuff as well. We also bought our host their recording gear so the show would sound nice, and subscribed to things like Slack and Zoom for communication, and had to pay for Dropbox storage, a website, a higher level with our podcast host, which would be Libsyn, all that stuff. So those were overhead expenses that added up on top of our already like $1,000-ish in labor per episode. So for a 10-episode series, we're looking at around somewhere between $11,000 and $12,000. But in order to do it that way, it didn't really make sense to just do one series or one handful of episodes, because to keep a marketing/ad person and producer and editor on staff, you have to have consistent cash flow, to pay for those things. Otherwise, you're just paying freelancers, which can be fine, honestly, but tough because they don't always have an understanding of the subject matter, in this case, like market gardening, and be consistently available when you need them. So effectively, in a sort of economy of scale, we found that we had to do several shows to sustain a single extra show. So that meant that our operating budget ballooned to around like $200,000 per year, which in fact was actually fine for a while. But as I detailed in the previous episode, one I'll link in the show notes, once ad ad revenue through YouTube started to decline and small farming advertisers were tapped out, it was no longer really sustainable at that level. Now, we saw that coming, and markets change all the time, no matter what business you're in. So we saw it coming and tried to pivot by officially switching to a nonprofit instead of just like acting like a nonprofit without all the benefits. So we saw it coming and switched to being a nonprofit to alleviate some of that financial strain by having access to more grants, perhaps, which, well, obviously, that's not really a thing at the moment. But also like larger donations, which heading into a possible recession seems not as likely, but just having a myriad of ways to earn the amount of money required to run this thing. So anyway, that's kind of the gist. It would cost us like tens of thousands of dollars to bring back even a single show. So if you're doing your own show and not worried about getting paid at first, though, by all means, start a podcast. They are fun to do and challenging, and you learn a lot in the process. For us, this daily show aims to sort of reset the base for no-till growers a little bit, so we have a more stable place to work from, to which I should say, so far so good. The show has stabilized us quite a bit, and we're seeing really great growth, like surprisingly good growth, especially in podcast downloads. So shouts to you podcast listeners. And hopefully in the future, this show will be able to support more shows, or at least do more with this show and YouTube series and all those things. Also, we're psyched that some of the shows we started have decided to spin off, and we look forward to supporting those as well and letting you all know about them when they launch new seasons. But for the time being, this show is about all we can afford. Ta-da! Anyway, I have no idea if that stuff is very interesting or not, but I enjoy sharing the guts of this stuff because it's probably not always obvious to the outsider. So shouts to you awesome Patreon members. I know it sounds cliche, but your support truly is what makes this possible, what makes me able to make this every day. In fact, let's get a question from one of you Patreon folks on fire ants in the next segment. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Amy Blankenship, who writes, quote, "You've talked about how pests and predators tend to balance out in the end, but I feel like that mainly works for native pests that don't also pose a danger to people and animals. I'd love to hear your thoughts on controlling fire ants. They're terrible where I live, Mississippi, in wet weather. I feel like they use any structure, such as raised beds and compost piles, to get up out of the clay soil." End quote. All right, so great question. And I don't think I've really tackled fire ants yet, so that's fun. Now, we don't have fire ants here on our farm, at least not yet. It's probably coming. For the moment, we're good. We have some native ants that take up residence in literally everything, but luckily they don't bite. And then we have a few other ants that do bite, but nothing like fire ants. So what I can't offer is experience personally getting rid of the fire ants. What I can offer is that I'm a nerd willing to read through some of the research to see what has been shown to actually be effective. I should say that like moles or gophers or along with other more elusive pests, it's rarely one thing that will solve the problem. There is some ecological stuff that you can do, which we will touch on, but solutions have to be multi-layered because pests like these, they'll adapt. Some treatments will work, some won't. It's a process and will likely stay that way indefinitely. Think about it this way. We all have pathogenic organisms on and around us pretty much all the time. What keeps them from taking off is having a heavy balance of good microbes that limit the pathogens from proliferating. We also work to not make the environment ripe for their populations by, for instance, eating healthy and exercising and gardening and even washing our hands, all of those things. A myriad of stuff that makes it hard for those organisms to take off. Same sort of idea applies to pests in the garden. They are hard to get rid of entirely, but with some work and multiple approaches, they can be kept in check. First, with fire ants, it starts with heading them off. I mean, That sounds like beheading him. What I mean is just kind of getting in their way. As soon as you see a mound or notice them in your raised beds or compost piles, you have to start the process of treating them. It's easier to just clean a cut, right, than get rid of an infection later. The same rule applies to ants. As soon as you see the first nest, it's time to act. One study from 1980 in the Journal of Georgia Entomological Society found that on cooler, sunny mornings or after a rainfall, that dumping around 3 gallons of boiling water carefully onto mounds will eliminate 60% of the nest, and this has been later reconfirmed in various studies with rates up to 90% of large colonies with proper and regular treatments of just boiling hot water. So I would start there. Just be like exceedingly careful. Use like a kettle instead of using like a giant pot of boiling water precariously hauled out to the field, please. Like, don't do that. Maybe even just get a large kettle and use that. There are some physical borders like talcum powder or Teflon tape that you can put around areas where you don't want them. The challenge with these is that the borders are, these sort of temporary borders are very temporary in wet climates or windy climates or whatever. So not a recommendation I would really make. Another tool, though, in the toolbox is something like diatomaceous earth. This is a bit of a broad spectrum quote unquote pesticide because it will target more than just the ant. So use it on and around the mounds and use it sparingly. And I would do that after I did the boiling water. There's also some recent literature that suggests erythritol, probably saying that right, a sugar substitute that you can find as a like certified USDA organic, is toxic to the colonies as well. Also, if the nest is highly visible, like mound it up, some of these organically approved options may help, like pyrethrins, spinosad, D-limonene, and retinone. I don't know if I said any of those right, though the efficacy of these it's a little inconsistent. Again, for me, I would start with the boiling water, then accompany that with something like diatomaceous earth and then the erythritol and see how far that stuff gets me. So do that, but also on the biological sort of balance side of that part of the question, make sure to encourage their natural predators, such as birds and lizards and spiders, along with things like dragonflies. Woodpeckers are very fond of ants, as are starlings, sparrows, and purple martins. So perhaps it's time for some bird houses if you don't have some already. So make sure to do what you can to encourage bird populations. Like I said, provide houses, but also places to land, water, etc. Taken all together, perhaps those can at very least help reduce populations. And in things like a compost pile, carefully turning the pile to disturb the nest as much as possible so as not to have to treat the pile might be the only way to keep them consistently unsettled and not wanting to settle in your compost pile. The boiling water, maybe if localized primarily to where you find them once you've disturbed the nest and they come up to the top of the pile, might be an option as well, though obviously not preferred. You don't want to pour a bunch of boiling water on your compost pile if you can help it, but maybe it helped alleviate some of the issue if used sparingly. Anyway, pests like that are very frustrating because they are so quiet and aggressive, especially around pests and kids, as you mentioned. So I think doing what you have to that won't cause further issues down the line, like avoiding chemical sprays that may treat the good guys as well, is the key. Anyway, I hope that helps at least a little bit. And I also hope others will add their 2 cents on fire ants in the comments. There are a lot of home remedies out there, but research is scant on their efficacy. So if something has worked for you, though, let us know. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we return, we'll talk art. Be right back. Today's episode is also brought to you by Farmhand. Newsletters, right? A necessary evil for CSA farmers. Join Farmhand and real CSA farmers on April 11th for a free digital workshop where they'll share strategies they use to turn their newsletters into powerful sales tools. Get the secrets and go-to templates for success when you register for the free workshop today at farmhand.partners/newsletter. That's farmhand.partners/newsletter. And I'll put the link in the show notes. All right, back to the show. So last Friday, the family and I went to the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, which is a great little museum. Always love that place, where we saw a painting of bare soil by an artist named Mary Mito. And in the painting, it looked like the soil, like it had just rained, and the soil looked barren, and it was just really, really well done. It was one of those hyper-realistic looking paintings that looked almost like a photograph. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see what it looked like. But the thing that struck me about this image is what always strikes me about art and galleries. There is almost never any art made about gardening and farming. Not none, obviously. The Impressionists, for instance, painted a lot of farming landscapes, and Monet had his mostly flower gardens. But I have long been fascinated by the lack of farming and gardening in art, especially art from like the mid 19th century and before, because, to be honest, there weren't cameras back then. So a lot of our depictions of gardening and farming from that time is at best like written, because people were not stopping to paint peasants. And in that way, we don't, by and large, really know a whole lot about what those gardens physically looked like. We only get glimpses of it from certain artists and glimpses of it in literature. To a farm nerd, though, this lack of interest in farms and gardenings as subject matter is very frustrating, but also very fascinating. To back up for a second, when Hannah and I got married, we didn't have a honeymoon. We wanted to start a farm, which is expensive. And so we decided instead to wait and do something nice for our 10-year anniversary. So we went to Paris. Hannah studied art, so while we were there, we went to a bunch of museums like the Louvre and others, and I spent almost the entire time trying to find gardens in the art. But I found it hard. Room after room, there was very little that reflected any sort of agrarian life. Gardening, farming, these are, and frankly still remain, subjects that artists largely ignore. And I find that a bit sad and a bit unfortunate, especially from a cataloging of history perspective, but also just from a social perspective. I learn a lot looking at old paintings of gardens, how they were managed, beds versus rows, how wild or kempt they were, what the soil looked like, how wild were the edges, often very wild, with trees and shrubs around. I also like to see it through the lens of art at the time. It tells, sort of its own story of the mood of artists, but I also think of the mood of the era. Like Van Gogh painted a few gardens. Those are my favorite. And they just tell such a big story. I think it says something about us as people, as culture, how we didn't and really still don't see the beauty in where our food comes from. It's not regal enough, not aspirational enough, not significant enough, not beautiful enough maybe to document or portray in art. And honestly, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the wild, to capture it. Like, I like the Monets and the Pissarros and those sorts of things as much as I like that Mary Mito painting where it looks like a desolate, sort of abused piece of land. I think having all of that is really important. Certainly, there are technical reasons for ignoring gardens. A lot of people from that time period who could afford the art were not wanting to buy paintings of the peasant lifestyles that they and their families were trying to escape, among other reasons. But I find it both sad and unfortunate that we have so many paintings of people, of stuff, but so few paintings of people in gardens and on farms. All that to say, perhaps the next time you're at a museum, look for the gardens. You won't see many, but what you do see will offer a lot of insight. Some older artists you can look out for are like Bruegel, I've mentioned Monet and Van Gogh, Camille Pissarro, Jean-François Millet, among others. Those are some of the few, even if ever so lightly, who took on the farm and garden life a little bit. Also, artists, make sure you're including some gardens and farms in your art. In 100 years, when all those Instagram posts and TikToks are long faded from digital degradation, I think this is going to be a Belle Epoque of its own in terms of gardens that the future may want to look back on. Anyway, thoughts on art and gardens, favorite garden artists? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it there. Don't forget, we are now officially a 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Like I said, y'all are how we are able to do this thing and therefore are awesome. Please make sure to like and follow and subscribe wherever you are getting this podcast. That is an easy way to help us out. Share it with your friends, all of those things. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and the team at No-Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook of the Seed Farmer by Dan Brisebois at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Magda Ksezak. All right, Magda, I'm trying. Ksezak. If you ever want me to screw up your name, just sign up for Patreon. I'm kind of getting to be a professional at it. Anyway, Magda was actually on our potato energy farm from yesterday, and Magda is the one that it helps the inmates manage the planting of the potatoes. And the potatoes are first sprouted in trays, then have to be handled delicately as to not burn your hands. This is an important fact. And then, the seeds they're sprouted, they're cut, they're planted at about 12 inches apart. It's important for energy potatoes. But the trick for this particular potato is that they have to be mulched absolutely immediately after you plant them, or the ground will start to glow, and that could alert planes flying over that something is up at your isolated, top secret potato farm, growing these special potatoes. Special potatoes for what? How? All good questions that we will address this week. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you tomorrow for Wednesday. Awesome. Bye.